The Department of Social Development, in collaboration with the International Labour Organization and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, are launching a report on basic income support for 18 to 60-year-olds. The plight of the unemployed has been brought into sharper focus by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and worse still, unemployment in the country is on the rise, with official data placing it at 34.9%. When taking the wider definition of unemployment into account, that figure is closer to 45%. With youth unemployment sitting at around 70%. Well, to give us more detail on the discussions being had, I'm joined by Brenton van Vrede. He's a director at Social Development Security. Thanks very much, Brenton, for joining us. Just tell us what have been the key focus areas today, and importantly, are there any viable solutions being put on the table to support the unemployed?
Thank you, and good afternoon to your listeners. So today, what we are doing is launching a report that was produced by a panel of experts, authors, basically specializing in economic and social policy, produced in collaboration with the International Labour Organization. And they have put together quite a very comprehensive and sound report on this, both the sort of the social issues, painting a very comprehensive picture, a very up-to-date picture of the reality we as a country find ourselves in South Africa on the social front, on poverty, in terms of inequality, updated with sort of some really good modeling work, given that we haven't had recent surveys. They've taken existing data and the existence, the sort of the different surveys that have been done and tried to put a good picture together for us. But they've also done some very good macroeconomic modeling and looking at what the sort of the consequences of a sort of expanded income support system for the country will be for South Africa. I think their recommendations and the conference is still ongoing. We've had the launch in the morning. We just about concluded a session where we spoke about the social context and economic issues, and in the afternoon they will be debating issues around employment creation and expanding social protection, as well as the key issue around that often gets raised in society about dependency. So in the session that they've just concluded, they had a very interesting debate around the impacts on the economy. Both the panel that presented, as well as various discussants who we've invited to make commentary on the report, seem to believe that, it's something our economy can handle. It's something government should consider. They did highlight some risk points to us that if we expanded too fast, we could shock the system. But sort of in the short term, they strongly recommending that we at least at the minimum level continue with the COVID SRD grant that we are currently providing, and then look at that as a base on which we can progressively expand a sort of a more expansionary sort of social assistance for those between the age groups of 18 to 60.
Yeah. Brenton, there's been talk about the basic income grant where all adults get some sort of financial support. But what's the point of giving this support to those who are already gainfully employed? Can't the approach be a bit more nuanced, particularly in the South African context?
I think the important point there, it's not really about whether the grant is universal or whether the grant is sort of very targeted at only unemployed people. It's more about efficiency within the targeting system. So the idea, even if you listen to those that call for a universal grant, what they're basically saying is they would prefer a more streamlined targeting method. So, for example, you and I would probably get the grant, but it would immediately just be clawed back through the tax system. That helps us prevent the obvious challenges we have with means tests, which creates a lot of exclusion and inclusion errors. You immediately eliminate all inclusion-exclusion errors by having a universal grant and having sort of like just government clawing the money back from the wealthier and those who are employed paying taxes through that system, versus trying to figure out who's poor and who should be deserving and who shouldn't be deserving. So it's more of a universalism. You should view it more as a means of more efficient targeting than sort of existing methods of targeting.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So, of course, you touched on it very briefly. Affordability is an issue that's constantly raised, particularly by the naysayers when it comes to something like a basic income grant. And, of course, the reality is that we do have a narrowing tax base and so on and so forth. But my question to you is, do you think if we had, and maybe it's a simplistic question seeking a simplistic answer, do you think if we didn't have corruption and billions of rand spent, that shouldn't be spent in the manner that it is spent on, or, the irregular and wasteful expenditure and so on and so forth, which tends to kind of accrue to about 30 billion per annum. Do you think that South Africa could actually afford this without any difficulty?
I think that's it's a lot. So the simplistic answer would be yes. If we didn't, it could. But the much more complex answer is I don't necessarily. So, for example, if one considers what irregular expenditure is, irregular expenditure is simply someone that procured something and didn't check maybe 5 of the 100 check boxes that they had to check, but the goods and services were still, for example, needed. It doesn't imply corruption in that sense. So a lot of irregular expenditure is actually government expenditure that would have to incur, the government would have incurred anyway. It's just that proper processes weren't followed when that expenditure was incurred. Corruption obviously is expenditure that we would not have to incur. But however, at the sort of levels that one is talking at of when one refers to sort of the calls for the big sort of BIG, I don't think that could fully be funded from that. I think there would be a case, yes, we could definitely set off a huge, a significant portion of it, but there would have to be other resources that would also still have to come into the pot. What we did find, or what this panel's report is saying to us, is that not all methods of funding are equal. So, for example, you do get a very strong stimulus effect coming from giving people the money, but you also then have a negative stimulus effect or opposite effect from the way you fund it. Reprioritizing money from other government services have the worst effect. So if one were to take money away from other government services, that would actually have more of a negative effect than what you would have, for example, through raising debt or raising taxes. Although raising both of those two also have a negative stimulus effect, but to some extent gets offset by the positive stimulus effect of the transfer.
Yeah.
And so one has to balance that.
Yeah, Brenton, it does sound like it's an impossible discussion that's being had. I hope you continue to come up with solutions. Thank you very much for your time there. Brenton van Vrede, he's a director at Social Development Security. We're going to go for a quick break.